I'm Jesse Ventura. Stay vigilant, question more. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride. The world according to Jesse. Today we discuss the 2020 election and the prevalence of both political partisanship and censorship in the media. Sit tight, the show starts now. The world according to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Brigida Santos for our top story today. The mainstream election pollsters got it wrong again. They predicted a landslide for Biden, even with a major polling error. But the race was tight in the swing states, leaving the country with a nail-biter of an election. Now, Jesse, what do you have to say about the pollsters? You know, they told us that they corrected all those mistakes they made back in 2016, and they convinced all of us that they would never be wrong again. And here we are.
Well, obviously there is something wrong amongst pollsters because you're right. They led us to believe that there could actually be a blue wave, if you want to call it, that was going to sweep the country, that Biden was winning nationally by 8 or 9 or double digits, and that he had double-digit leads in all of these different states around the country. And you thought that, wow, this is going to be a total takeover of the Democratic Party. How wrong they were. This thing's going down to the wire. It's probably going to be decided by 1 or 2 electoral votes in the end. And we don't even know at this time at all when we will have a newly elected president. So the pollsters, yeah, something's got to be done. There's obviously something in the polling that is causing this to happen. They're not reaching all the people, or they're limiting who they're talking to. I'm not sure what it might be, but certainly, Brigida, something's out of whack, because they claim they got it wrong 4 years ago. They claim to right the ship now, and they got it wrong again this time, and they're getting it wrong in a fairly massive way. It's not a small getting wrong, it's a pretty big getting wrong.
In other news, the United Nations warns that Yemen is on the brink of losing an entire generation of children to hunger due to the U.S.-backed, Saudi-led war on Houthi rebels and the coronavirus pandemic. Yemen's UN humanitarian coordinator says, quote, "If the war doesn't end now, we're nearing an irreversible situation." The worsening food security crisis leaves an estimated 100,000 Yemeni children under the age of 5 at risk of death. Parts of the country are now seeing the highest levels of malnutrition ever recorded. There are also at least 250,000 breastfeeding women in need of treatment for malnutrition. The situation in Yemen remains bleak. Food supply chains affected by the war and the coronavirus-induced recession are still in trouble, and donor funding has fallen to the lowest point since the conflict escalated in 2015. 6 years later, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains the worst in the world, with no signs of improvement on the horizon. Jesse?
Well, it's a shame. It's a crying shame, if you want to put it that way. You look at Saudi Arabia and you look at the United States' support of Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabians are mostly a Muslim nation. We're, I guess, mostly a Christian nation. The point I'm getting to is that how can people claim to be religious, claim to worship God and do God's will, and yet they participate in something like this? They're going to allow hundreds of thousands of children to literally starve to death, and what are they exactly fighting over? What is it that this big war is going on for? And here we are, the United States, supporting the Saudis 100% with arms and any other logistics they need. This is a country that very likely participated in some manner in 9/11. It's also a country that killed Khashoggi and cut him into pieces. The Saudis, why do we have this allegiance to them, and why would we choose to participate in something as gross as what is happening in Yemen? The United States should hang its head in shame for what's going on over there and our support of it.
All right, now let's talk about freedom of speech in the United States. Scott Atlas, the White House policy advisor on coronavirus, recently appeared in an interview on RT's show Going Underground with host Afshin Rattanzi. And for doing that, he had to apologize. Atlas says, quote, "I regret doing the interview and apologize for allowing myself to be taken advantage of. I especially apologize to the national security community who is working hard to defend us." Now, I want to emphasize that it's not what Atlas said during that interview that he apologized for, but instead for agreeing to talk to RT in the first place. Atlas said he shouldn't talk to an outlet registered as a foreign agent, but thousands of companies are currently registered under FARA, and the U.S. has no problem doing business with those companies. So what's so special about RT that makes it taboo in the land of the free?
Well, Brigitte, what makes us taboo is because what we always say, we cover the stories that mainstream media won't touch in the United States of America. You know, I worked a short time for mainstream media, quote, if you want to call it that, on MSNBC. And every day I fought with them because the stories would come from the top down to me, and they'd require me to talk about what they wanted me to talk about. That's how it works there. If you watch what goes on during the day, they have about 5 or 6 major stories, and then they're covered simply by different talking heads all day long, but it's the same stories over and over and over again. So it doesn't surprise me that he's apologizing, because they do not want the competition from us. We do a better job than what United States mainstream media does, and so therefore they don't want to give us any breath of life here, because people who see us will then choose to watch us, and that'll cost them money. Because let's remember now, our news world in the United States, it's all about entertainment and entertainment dollars.
Sure. In relevant news, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald has resigned from the publication that he co-founded, The Intercept, citing alleged censorship of an article that he wrote about Joe and Hunter Biden, titled, quote, "The Real Scandal, U.S. Media Uses Falsehoods to Defend Joe Biden from Hunter's Emails." Now, the alleged emails in question were first published in an article by the New York Post. In that alleged email, Hunter Biden introduces top executives at Burisma, the Ukrainian energy firm in which he sits on the board, to his vice president father. Now, Joe Biden, of course, later pressured Ukrainian government officials into firing the prosecutor that was investigating Burisma. So there's a lot of questions there. Now, the New York Post says it obtained these alleged emails in a laptop that was reportedly dropped off at a repair shop and never picked up in Hunter Biden's home state of Delaware. Now, rather than looking into the alleged emails and trying to verify their authenticity or asking real questions to find out whether the story is true or not, the Post article was immediately labeled Russian disinformation and in the corporate media, and then banned from appearing or being shared on social media sites, including Facebook and Twitter, which said that the Post was potentially harmful. Jesse, these are incredibly serious allegations. They should be investigated. The public has a right to know about them, just as the media decided previously that the public had a right to see all those allegations about alleged collusion between Trump and Russia, the Steele dossier, and those infamous PP tapes. So why does the media handle allegations against Biden differently than those against Donald Trump? Why is it so quick to dismiss a potentially major story?
You're asking me that, Brigitte? I got to tell you, I don't know. They should be investigating it. I think the best thing you could do is ask them that, why they're not investigating. We'll have a laugh over that, but they should be in a certain way. But let's remember something. When you've been involved and you're a career politician like Joe Biden, and you're on the upper levels of government, they're all dirty. They've all done stuff. And the reason why, again, I go back to it, they've created a system based upon bribery. Now, bribery is against the law in the private sector, but it's alive and well in the world of politics. Well, if you're comfortable with the thought of participating in bribery, why wouldn't you be comfortable in participating in other things? Anyway, censorship is bad, always is bad. And these allegations should be investigated. But as I said, when you're a career politician and you're involved in high levels like that, you're going to be dirty because you're involved in a system that's basically corrupt to begin with. So until we clean up our system of government, you're always going to have corruption, and you're always going to have stories like this of people selling influence, getting money, and all of that. The big thing is, always remember this: how many congressmen go into Congress and yet they come out millionaires? Somehow they make more money than what their salary indicates they should in becoming a millionaire.
Censorship of stories across social media platforms and search engines leads us to a very important question. Who controls the conversation? When it comes to free speech, is it time to regulate social media companies and search platforms, including Google, as public utilities, so the government can apply free speech rules to them? After all, social media and search platforms have a monopoly on power, social influence, the conversation, and information. Many people argue that social media is an essential service in modern society, making it a public utility. But as of now, broadband access to the internet isn't even considered a public utility, so it's not regulated like other essential services, including water or electricity. So Jesse, I'm going to ask you that very question. Who controls the conversation?
That's interesting. I'm not sure right now who controls that conversation and why. Because look at it this way. On some hands, it should be controlled, but then do you really want the government controlling the internet? Because that's the fear that I've had all along when the internet first came out, was that it ran free and had no government supervision. And now, the government wants to control everything in our lives, and they're not about to let something as large as the internet go without some type of regulations or control over it. So it's really a thin line you cross there. Which way do you go? Do you allow for government control, or do you not and let it run free and truly be a free thing that we would have to judge on our own whether things are true or false, rather than government censorship or government control of the industry? It's a tough question, and it's one that's going to loom over all of us in decades to come.
Glenn Greenwald is also one of the 3 reporters who exposed the National Security Agency's mass surveillance program and introduced Edward Snowden to the world. This week, Snowden announced that he and his wife are expecting a son, so they will indeed apply for Russian citizenship now that the country has granted him permanent residency, which we discussed last week on the show. Now, on Twitter, Snowden states, quote, "After years of separation from our parents, my wife and I have no desire to be separated from our son. That's why in this era of pandemics and closed borders, we're applying for dual U.S.-Russian citizenship. Lindsay and I will remain Americans, raising our son with all the values of the America we love, including the freedom to speak his mind. And I look forward to the day I can return to the States so the whole family can be reunited." Snowden has lived under political asylum in Russia since 2013, when he revealed the existence of the clandestine U.S. intelligence program. Under the next U.S. presidency, Jesse, do you think anything is going to change for Snowden in terms of getting a fair trial in the U.S. as he's requested, or possibly even being pardoned? I highly doubt it. What do you think?
I highly doubt it also. I think Edward Snowden is smart in getting his Russian citizenship, because I have the bad feeling that he and his wife and child are going to spend the rest of their lives living in Russia, which may not be that bad a thing. I visited there. It's a beautiful country. But the fact that he would almost be under arrest if he left Russia, because the United States would be waiting to corral him and take him to some court that they'd convict him for treason or whatever for telling us the truth. So unfortunately, I believe Edward Snowden will be living the rest of his life with his wife in Russia, and I wish him very well. It's too bad. The only way he gets off the hook, Brigida, is if I become president.
All right, it's time for a break. When we return, Jesse sits down with investigative journalist Greg Palast to talk about voter suppression efforts leading up to the election. We'll be right back.
The world according to Jesse.
Prior to the election, investigative journalist Greg Palast uncovered voter suppression efforts and voter disenfranchisement. He joins me now from Los Angeles to discuss his findings. Greg, leading up to the election, we heard claims that mail-in ballots are susceptible to fraud. What's the probability of fraud in the vote by mail process?
I can tell you exactly because I looked at the statistics. I used to be a statistician. The answer is you're 540% more likely to be hit and killed by lightning than to cast a fraudulent mail-in ballot. So it doesn't happen. And in fact, the Election Law Journal said it is that the number of cited fraudulent ballots is far less than the number of cited extraterrestrial landings. So it doesn't happen. But what does happen is that mail-in voters get defrauded. Here's look, before the election, I wrote a book called How Trump Stole 2020. I called this out, and I said specifically it opens up in Georgia. I said this election will be jacked with in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and with the mail-in votes, which you're seeing in Philadelphia. That came. And no one is talking about it. Well, I did, but, it's not getting a lot of traction. I put out some reports that black voters matter, but, we're still playing with Jim Crow elections. I'm sorry, Jesse. That's what's going on here. They're jacking. They took 198,000 people off the voter rolls of Georgia before the election illegally. I even sued the Secretary of State of Georgia to bust open his files to get that info. The ACLU, whatever you think of them, they put out my report showing those 198,000 illegally removed, including, for example, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin has been removed from the voter rolls. It's like crazy stuff. So Georgia was predictable. Michigan was predictable. Wisconsin was predictable. I was up there just before the lockdown, and the mail-in challenge in Pennsylvania was predictable too. I said, this is mail-in madness. Why is the Democratic Party telling people to mail in votes which won't be counted?
Now, not every ballot is always counted on Election Day. At the time of taping, ballots are still being counted. Why don't we count all the ballots? Why aren't they all counted?
We never count all the ballots. Look, Governor, here's the issue. According to MIT and Caltech, mail-in ballots, 22% don't get counted. About 1 in 10 people who ask for mail-in votes just don't get them. A third of our soldiers, they talk about, it's easy to have mail-in ballots. Our military does it. A third of the soldiers who want to vote never get their ballots. They just don't get them. The other, and about 1 in 10 civilians in America who ask. The other is that 1 in 8 ballots is challenged. They put Scotch tape on the envelope. 100,000 ballots in 2016 lost to postage due. This whole cockamamie business of checking people's signatures. Come on. We lost 141,000 ballots in 16. That's very few mail-in votes, relatively. And 141,000 ballots because someone challenged a signature, said, I don't like that person's signature. Well, we don't have 141,000 expert forgers in America. No one was arrested. It's just a con job to knock out ballots. This is America. And you know what? The rest of the world, I heard on National Petroleum Radio, by the way, that everyone's surprised because America is the gold standard of democracy. No, I don't think so. I worked, you know that I used to work for BBC Television and The Guardian in Europe and in, Europe and South America. And people are like, America doesn't have anything close to democracy.
Now, what do you predict for this election? How many days could it take to tally up the ballots?
Well, it shouldn't take more than a couple days unless there's mass challenges, which I expect it hasn't happened. But the problem is they're knocking out a hell of a lot of votes. Plus, in Pennsylvania, we're going to have the fight about late ballots. But there's late ballots everywhere. And I expect that basically it's going to go to court challenges about whether the votes will be counted in Pennsylvania. Biden has a route because of picking up that second district in Nebraska. That one electoral vote may get him to 270 without Pennsylvania. But look, they're gonna shoplift Georgia, and so a couple days, but then it goes to court.
Okay. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 has never been used. For those who don't know what it is and who ultimately decides the results.
Well, this is one of the issues. If we get like say one legislature, let's say Pennsylvania says, oh, we're not going to certify a vote, which, it's up to the legislatures of these states. It can happen in Wisconsin and Michigan too. In which case it goes to the 12th Amendment. It goes to the House of Representatives. One state, one vote, by the way. No, Nancy Pelosi doesn't pick your president. And if there's disputes, it goes to something called the Electoral Count Act of 1887. I knew that you had just reread it, Jesse. That's why I like to talk to you. You got this stuff all memorized. Here's the problem. No one's ever used this act. We don't, what is this act? It's basically whatever Amy Covid Barrett says it is. You're going to have, it goes to the Supreme Court. And, we went through this. It's Florida all over again. It's deja vu all over again. And it could end up in the Supreme Court with, with a 6-3 or 5-4 decision saying we're throwing out these ballots in Pennsylvania, or we're not even counting those electoral votes. A mess, but it was completely 100% predictable.
Okay, now back in September, the ACLU released a report you helped compile regarding voter registration purges in the state of Georgia. For those who don't know, what happened in Georgia?
Okay, well, you got this crazy business, which we have all over America, of these political hacks in charge of our voting. It's crazy, except in China and Russia. I don't think we have that anywhere where a party can get involved in the count. But let me tell you, so we have this crazy system. In Georgia, we have this right-wing Republican political hack named Brad Raffensperger, who removed 300,000 voters from the voter rolls in the last 2 years leading up to this election. 198,000 of them, he said, had left the state or left Atlanta. Listen, you shouldn't vote in Atlanta. If you don't live in Atlanta, it's against the law. But we actually went through the list name by name with the post office, by the way, and the experts from Amazon and eBay, et cetera. They know exactly where you were, Jesse, last Thursday at 2 p.m. and what you downloaded. I won't tell anyone. And we found out that 198,000
nothing. They don't. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. They don't. Wait. They don't know nothing about me because I don't do the internet and I've never owned a cell phone.
Oh boy. Okay, you're a tough one. You're a tough case. But most people can't resist that.
Now let's get back. Wait a minute. How many voters were purged in Georgia, and what about elsewhere?
Okay, 198,351 illegally removed in Georgia. That's going to, even if Trump pulls it off, it's going to be greater than his margin. Then we went to Wisconsin, and we found that now there, I don't think that Trump's going to pull it off because we informed the state that 100,000 people that they were about to remove shouldn't be removed. They said that a woman named, for example, Saquonna Taylor had moved out of Milwaukee. So we went to Saquonna and say, you can't vote in Milwaukee. She says, I didn't move. I said, how can we tell you didn't move from Milwaukee? She says, look at the name on the building. I'm a Milwaukee County supervisor. I haven't left Milwaukee. And this is the games that they play. Then you go to Michigan. 300,000 people removed. Now, that was by the prior Republican administration. However, the current Democratic administration, when we gave them the names and the list of people wrongly removed, they said, we'll get around to it. Democrats didn't do anything for these voters.
Greg, I got to jump in. We're out of time, unfortunately. Greg Palast, thank you for your time, and thank you very much for the work you do, which is helping to put democracy back into the hands of the people. We'll have you back again.
Wouldn't that be a good idea? See you at gregpalast.com. You're the best, Governor. Bye.
The world according to Jesse.
Let's turn to the viewers. Before the polls closed, we asked people to respond to the election on social media and give us their predictions. Chase Miller says, I can't predict anything out of this year. All I know is the war machine and Wall Street will win regardless of which candidate wins the race. Jesse?
Well, it's hard to argue with her. I think she speaks the truth, and I'm not going to offer a difference of opinion on that one. I think she's dead on.
Cosplay Vigilante says things look exactly as every news network predicted for a delayed Biden win. The big surprise is that everyone seems to be buying the red Mirage. Come on, folks, we talked about this.
Well, you got to trust your voting system. You got to trust that it's done fairly and accurately. I do. And the reason I trust it is because If the voting in Minnesota were rigged, do you think for 1 second I would have won? I don't think so. So I trust the voting system, and I think when it all comes through the wash, the winner wins.
And this next user has a wonderful name. It's very funny. Nixon's chest hair says, tonight is proof the DNC doesn't know how to pick a candidate. Biden has no appeal beyond not being Trump. Whatever happens, the idea that he's not winning in a landslide against a buffoon is embarrassing.
He might be right on that one, because with all the things that Donald Trump did, especially with the virus and everything else he's been involved with, insulting people top to bottom. If you don't agree with him, you're somehow unpatriotic and all that. Trump should have been smashed in this election. And the fact that is that he wasn't, and that scares the hell out of me, because it tells me that 50% of the country doesn't give a damn about the coronavirus. And if that's the case, it's going to be with us forever.
Thanks for watching. Send us your comments on Facebook and Twitter for a chance to be featured next week. As always, we'll be covering more stories ignored by the corporate media.
And remember, when the government lies, the truth becomes a traitor. Stay vigilant.
The world according to Jesse.